They can use the loop that's in front of the building on the Route 7 side, or they can also use the flagpole entrance from Haycock. Both is shown in these graphics. And then for families that are accessing our stadium field, the access to the stadium field is through a fence that's located behind George Mason as you're coming along Mustang Alley. So what we're asking is families to drop their students that are going to the athletic fields off in front with the flagpole loop. And then they'll be able to take the pedestrian crosswalk, which I'll show in just a minute, walk across the road there, and then enter the field. So that temporary walkway, this is an example of where you enter that stadium field access. We know that currently, when you look at that stadium field access, our signage has room for improvement, right? So currently, there are temporary signage that's up, and we know that that signage is too small, and larger signage has been ordered that'll clearly show that the entrance to the field is this way. So I think the important thing for our community to remember is if you're dropping your student off at Henderson, be sure you're using the Husky Loop in the front of Henderson. And then for Mason and access to the field, use either the loop on the Route 7 side of George Mason or the flagpole loop as you enter from Haycock. So when we look at parking, this is a graphic that shows where the parking is available this summer. And we've used this graphic before, but again, I want to be clear, this is only for the summer. So in the summer, we have the 304 spots available. You can see the parking that was previously in the bus turnaround loop is now with inside Gilbane's construction fence. But I want to be really clear that when school opens in the fall, we will have added all of that additional parking in front of Henderson. So we will have, when school opens, the same amount of parking that we have currently, which is approximately 400 spaces. So we're very excited about this construction project. All of the dirt that we expect to be removed later this week, even with the day of washout rain, Gilbane is really confident about their schedule and the additional work that we'll do this week. And we're also very grateful for our partnership with EYAP and Hoffman as we work to underground utilities that will benefit both the school and the economic development site.
I'm going to add to that because I think it's important also to note that EYAP and Hoffman is going to begin some of their undergrounding of utilities. And I don't know if you mentioned that or not.
I briefly mentioned it. They're actually going to start the process for setting manholes on Thursday.
Okay.
So you'll see them actually cutting areas in the concrete. You'll see it in the parking areas in front of Henderson, closest to Route 7. And then in the areas currently right now where we have maintenance trucks and buses parked between Henderson and George Mason. They then will start next week at Monday working in the evenings from 4 p.m. on. And they'll first lay the 3 manholes that go in that area, and then they will underground the utility corridors underneath there. I'm trying to complete all of that work between those 2 schools before school resumes in the fall.
Great. Thank you so much, Ms. Michael. That's very impressive, the amount of work you've all done this summer and keeping our students so safe while we still run all of our usual programs up there. So thank you. Any comments or questions from the board? Yes, Ms. Litton.
I have a question that you may not know the answer to. And I'm asking it mostly just kind of out of curiosity and because I've watched Founders Row. Kind of all those trucks come in the morning and they park, it seems like in the Staples parking lot. You know, I didn't know if we were going to have a similar thing where there's a bunch of trucks come somewhere and, you know, are parked and then do the load and go.
I actually think that's an excellent question, and it was one of the things we discussed this morning when we were at the site looking at site logistics. In the morning, if the trucks get there and we have places that they need to queue up, what they'll do is they'll go inside the Gilbane construction area and they'll actually queue there. So when we look at this map, if I go all the way back to the beginning. Oops. They'll be queuing up in that light shaded area just above the blue future parking. So they'll actually enter inside the Gilbane construction fence and wait there.
Mr. Anderson?
Thank you, Madam Chair. And just to pick up again on the parking, so by the time school starts in the fall, we'll be back to the 400. Is that a level we're going to be able to maintain throughout the process as we go all the way through into the beginning of the demolition of the old high school and moving into phase one of the new construction?
So we'll have all of that parking on site and available to us until the demolition of the current high school starts. At that point, we've been talking with both Virginia Tech and WMATA in terms of ensuring that we can purchase or have parking from them that will allow us to continue our parking until the trapezoid area can be built.
Thank you.
Just to further put a even finer point on it, it's for a semester. It's not for a full year. So it would be the second semester of that last year because the trapezoid will be done that final summer.
So in terms of the additional parking that's going to open in the fall to bring us to the 400-plus spaces, has there been any thought in terms of how we're going to be distributing the parking in terms of student parking, staff parking, visitor parking, et cetera?
So our intention is to take the spaces that are currently along Mary Ellen Henderson that are currently labeled for our ASAP program and to make those visitor parking spaces, since parents tend to use them either before school or after school in terms of drop-off and pickup. So that will give us some visitor spaces right there. We don't anticipate having any changes to student parking. We know that overall we've been selling fewer student parking spaces, but between the current space that we have available for seniors and juniors, we know that should accommodate all of the student parking that we need. When we look at adding this additional parking, we will have some staff people that will be parked a little bit farther away from the building than they were before. But when we've surveyed our principals looking at how much parking we use on our site every day, we know that we have more parking spaces than we currently use on an average day, looking at all of our staff, students, and visitors. So we are confident that we'll be able to serve everyone with parking on the site during the school day.
And just a follow-up question with regard to the student parking. Has there been any determination on whether we're going to continue with the assigned spots or if we're going to be doing away with that and having it be an open lottery?
We're doing away with assigned spaces. And the reason that we are is it's a completely inefficient way to park. So if you have 10 students that are out, for example, that's 10 spaces that aren't used, that could be used for anyone who came into the site. So for the foreseeable future, we look like we're going to move away from assigned spaces. So students will just need to get there a little bit earlier to get closer.
And then I guess with regard to that, arrangement, how are we going to patrol in terms of who's eligible to park there and who's not? Because obviously you're paying for a parking spot and currently, you're either there or you're not. And if someone else is in your spot, then that person's probably not supposed to be there. But I mean, it seems with having, unassigned spots that there's a greater chance of people parking who are not paying for it.
They'll still need to display their parking pass. So we would be monitoring the parking passes. And if cars are there without the parking pass, we'll take appropriate action.
Yes, Mr. Webb.
With regard to staff parking, do we do any encouraging or do we have any numbers on how many of our staff potentially take advantage of public transportation to the George Mason, Mary Ellen site?
We don't currently have information about how many staff take public transportation. We have talked about innovative ways to encourage people to carpool, to ride again, or ride together, to do things to encourage people to track their steps and really use the additional steps that they're taking, or other ways to look at incentivize or rewarding people for whether it's carpooling or other recognition. So we really are thinking through opportunities in terms of seeing this as a positive situation.
And one additional question, remind me where the new bus parking is going to be at.
We're very excited. The city has been very supportive in terms of our buses. We're currently parking buses at their property yard. They've been very gracious in terms of their fence was moved. They've restriped all the spots for us. They've put in stop guards. And we currently have a large number of our buses there. So we're super thankful to Robert and all the staff at the city who've been super great in terms of helping us get our buses there. So with that property yard parking and then the parking directly adjacent to Mary Ellen Henderson up against George Mason, between those two sites, we believe we can serve all of our buses on our campuses and at the property yard.
I'm just adding, I'm not correcting, because you're absolutely right. One modification that we will make while some of the undergrounding is happening by EYA for the summer is we may move some of our buses down from between Mary Ellen Henderson and George Mason down to the Haycock parking lot, and that would just be temporary through the summer.
Yeah, and we'll have to move them because one of the manholes is directly under where the buses are parking. So we'll get a week-by-week schedule from them, but that manhole laying will actually occur next week. So you'll see some of those buses in that lot by Haycock as soon as later this week.
And I think some of them might already be there starting today. When I went by today, that lot was full of buses.
Yeah, and when we met with transportation this morning, one of the things we talked about was to help people start planning for being there after they did their runs this afternoon, to immediately start trying to park them in Haycock so we could be sure that we were ready. So when they started doing the undergrounding of utilities, we would be ready to welcome them onto our site.
All right, if that's it from the board, we'll move on to our next three items. We're going to discuss together, and then we'll take a motion on each one individually, since they're all three related. So that's going to be signing of the land exchange agreement between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia, signing of deed of re-subdivision, vacation, rededication, dedications and conveyances, and signing of deed of lease between Falls Church City School Board and Falls Church City, Virginia. Dr. Noonan.
Great, thank you, Madam Chair. Before we take these three items up for discussion and final approval, I want to just take a second to thank a couple of people for their extraordinary work on these three items, starting with Tricia Minson, our in-house counsel. She, along with Jeremy Root, who's our outside counsel, have worked incredibly hard, along with Carly Aubrey, who's here tonight, and Carol McCostry from the city side, general government side as well, to make sure that these land exchange re-subdivisions, vacations, rededications, dedications, conveyances, and the final signing of the deed of lease work well and within the scope of what we're trying to all accomplish with the site at the high school and the economic development side. So these became a little bit tricky because there was an awful lot of conversation and a lot of coordination between multiple entities. But the folks that I mentioned did extraordinary work to pull all of that together to get us where we are today. So last night, the City Council did take these up and did very quickly, no pressure, but I just want you to know it was done very quickly, did move ahead with approving each of those in a 6-0 vote last night. The motions that you have tonight before you are actually identical to the motions that essentially the council passed last night. So you're essentially approving the same thing that they approved last night. This is important work because it is essentially the land swap. And then also the whole idea of now that we're doing this land swap, our current high school won't sit on school board property. So with that, I am going to turn it over to Tricia Minson to make a couple of explanations and answer any questions that you might have that have come up. But I did want to start with just saying thank you to them for their extraordinary work.
Thank you. Good evening. The documents that are in front of you tonight and that the City Council approved yesterday evening are three separate documents that relate to the exchange of the land where the school is currently located and where the fields are currently located. As you all know, the fields where our students play right now are currently owned by the city, and that's where the new high school is going to be built. And the land where the high school, the majority of the land where the high school is currently sitting is going to turn into economic development. So the first document that is before you tonight is the exchange agreement. That agreement takes the land that is currently titled in the school and gives it to the city, and takes the land that's currently titled in the city and gives it to the school. This document was last presented to the board in public work session on June 18th, and there are a very few minor changes to the version that was presented on the 18th work session and this evening. They include removing a reference to parcel C and incorporating a reference to the deed of lease, which we'll discuss as the last document. But we thought it was important to reference that here, and the exchange agreement is also going to be an attachment exhibit to the deed of lease that the school board and the city will be entering into for the
high school after the city owns the land on which the old high school is located. And I'm happy to take any questions